Hi everyone. So let's talk a little bit today about the sources of iron and how important it is to understand the food that we're eating, the ways that we're taking iron in, and how that works into our body's natural abilities to metabolize iron and use iron. So you'll hear me talk a lot about in social media and in the Diabetics for Diabetics podcast about how taking on excess iron. Again, we need more clarification on what exactly is excess iron, but basically unnatural iron, any sort of added iron. I talk a lot about enriched wheat flour as being probably the #1 source of supplemental iron in the standard Western diet that a lot of people don't even know about. But that's added iron, usually in the form of ferric oxide or ferrous sulfate, which is a non-heme version of iron. And the real issue with that has to do with the context within the nutrients of the food that it is being added to. Because what people don't know about their iron absorption and iron recycling system within their body is that it runs a very, very tight show, and it is incredibly efficient at absorbing only exactly what it needs and hanging on to as much as it possibly can over the lifespan of the iron and the cells that it's being used in, because it understands how volatile any extra or too little iron is on the system. So our body is 95% efficient at keeping the iron in circulation, right? No matter what's being done. So it attaches to the red blood cell. The red blood cell goes through its life cycle and breaks and needs to be recycled. The iron that was on that red blood cell is going to be used again. The cell, the mitochondria, where the iron is being used to create energy, maybe that cell dies off or ages and is kind of pushed off into circulation to be disposed of. That iron is going to be recycled. Our body can only excrete anywhere from 1 to 2 milligrams per day of iron, okay? 1 to 2. And that 1 to 2 milligrams that we're able to excrete via the kind of the sloughing of intestinal cells or colonic cells is equal to the amount that we're able to take on. Our body can only really absorb 1 to 2 milligrams per day in a healthy adult, right? So again, our body knows exactly how much is coming in and how much is going out. And the total amount of iron is meant to stay in a very precise amount because it knows too much or too little is dangerous. So in my case for iron overload as being the primary reason that everyone is experiencing these autoimmune conditions and these chronic inflammatory conditions has to do with this artificial supplementation of iron without any consideration for the alternative pieces that are needed for this iron to do what it needs to do. Now, our body, like I mentioned before, is very precise in knowing exactly how much iron it's taking on and how much iron it's getting rid of. The process of taking on this iron, absorbing and utilizing it, have a series of mechanisms and pathways that are dependent on other nutrients, any range of things like fat-soluble vitamins, E, A, D, and K, copper, trace minerals like selenium, molybdenum, manganese. So the iron overload issue is not just an iron overload issue. It is an underload of copper, an underload of fat-soluble vitamins to support the mechanisms needed for iron to do what it's supposed to do. And so when I stress the caution for people to avoid taking on any added iron, like in enriched wheat flour or supplementing, That has to do with the fact that that iron is being taken on with no supporting nutrients, with no context for what's needed to actually absorb and utilize it. Now, what I don't want to happen is for people to hear that and be like, oh my God, I have to avoid all food with iron in it. And that's not the case, because iron is very abundant in food, whether you are eating animal products or plants, because again, iron is important. It is a catalyst for creating energy, whether it's chlorophyll in plants or mitochondria in animals. It is necessary. But one thing that whole foods have that added iron does not is the supporting cast. So if you're eating meat, meat is incredibly rich in things like zinc and copper, that, as well as fat soluble vitamins that are going to allow for iron to be properly absorbed and properly disposed of. Same goes for plants. Plants have fat soluble vitamins. Plants have a lot of those other trace minerals, things like manganese and selenium, that are going to prevent taking on too much of that iron. Because where we've gone wrong is in taking all of these supplemental and fortified versions of iron without the supporting cast, our body has absorbed far more than it has been able to excrete. And when our body takes on this excess amount of iron without any of the tools to be able to dispose of it properly, recycle it properly, store it properly, that iron becomes toxic and initiates these huge, huge cascades of inflammation and oxidation. Now, eliminating processed foods and packaged foods and fortified foods is the best way to stop the onslaught of iron without any supporting minerals, right? The best thing you can do initially is to switch to whole foods that are going to give you that supporting cast of minerals. Now, I would argue that because of how we're raised, the foods that we've been brought up on, everyone is existing in some sort of imbalance in a way that we have taken iron on and had it stored in our cells improperly, to a point where the balanced food that we are going to correct our imbalances is going to do it at a much slower rate, because these imbalances are so far skewed that if you're eating balanced food, it's very slowly kind of bringing you back to normal. And all the while you're in this imbalance, you're experiencing these inflammatory conditions. So what I've done is I've turned to supplementing those supporting nutrients to help kind of limit the amount of time it takes to kind of bring me back to normalcy and balance. Now, if you want to learn more about how I've been offloading iron and rebalancing my iron recycling system, check out my Iron Out protocol. It's going to be available via the link in the description. And if you want to know more about the scientific research backing the ties between the inflammation caused by iron overload and our autoimmune and chronic diseases going on today, check out my ebook. It's called An Ironclad Cause: Solving Diabetes and More.